Okay, so this is actually take two. Welcome back to Sidelbia Snippets. This is season 2, and a few things we should get into before we begin the actual episode itself. This season will be released every other week, like last season. However, these first 2 episodes will be released back to back weeks because this episode was supposed to come out last week, but due to some personal issues and some technical issues and some health issues and a bunch of other things, we had to push it back a week. But don't worry. I promise season 2 is happening, as you can hear right now. The other thing that we are trying for this season that we did not do last season is how I provide the information to all of you. If, as you might remember, last season was very scripted and very formulaic. We are going to try something a little different in that we are going to try and relax that, ease back a little bit. And we are going to try an approach that's a little less scripted. However, that means you are going to have to bear with me a little bit as it's a big deal for me stepping away from a script. But I'm hoping it will be better, and I don't know, hopefully you guys like my personality. Anyways, let's just get into the episode. I promise it's going to be an awesome one. Welcome to Sidelbia Snippets, Season 2. So for this episode, we actually had a super cool guest, and I'm probably going to try and intersect his comments throughout the episode. But before we do that, I'm going to give a little background. What Jerry Greenberg is most known for is his work with Atlantic Records, which was a company founded in 1947 by Ahmet Ertegun. Why am I struggling with those names? By Ahmet Ertegun and Herb Abramson. At this point in the U.S., the most popular genres of music were jazz and big band, with Billboard's top song of 1947 being Near You by Francis Craig. Now, I did actually start working on a playlist of influential music from this time period that came out of Atlantic Records or had some relation to Atlantic Records. And if people would like to hear that, let me know. That's sort of one of my favorite hobbies or favorite things to do is to make historical playlists. As anyone who listened to season 1 knows, I also have a playlist of the history of California rock as music. But that's the beginning of Atlantic Records, is it started off with what was the popular music of the time, jazz and big band. However, around the mid-1950s, what was popular music began to change and people started looking for something new. Rock Around the Clock by Billy Haley is considered to be the first rock and roll song of what we will be calling the Rock Revolution, released in 1954. However, one of the most famous moments in the rock revolution actually happened in 1965, and it's when Bob Dylan got on stage and whipped out an electric guitar to a booing audience. It's a moment that, if you don't know about it, your dad probably does. Now, we should also probably talk about the word or phrase rock revolution in that it's a little complicated. And saying that it started, or that rock music and rock and roll started in 1954 is also a very controversial thing to say. Because most people would credit the beginning of rock music with figures such as Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And I would totally agree with that. And that is for another episode, though. For this episode, we will be focusing specifically and primarily on those bands that found popularity and rise around the 60s and 70s. And that's why I use the term rock revolution, because it is a reemergence of rock music, not the origins of it as a genre. I hope that makes sense. I'm in no way trying to discredit these original, awesome musicians. And if you all would like to learn about the origins of rock music, please let me know, and I will be so happy to do an episode about it. No, instead, we will be talking about bands such as Led Zeppelin, who released their first album in 1969, and the Rolling Stones, who released their first album in 1964, as well as other bands such as Foreigner, the Beatles, Queen, and Deep Purple. The Beatles actually will come up a lot in what will be episode 2 of season 2, and less so in this episode because those last 3 bands I mentioned are not actually signed, nor were ever signed, to Atlantic Records. Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones and Foreigner all were, and we will be getting into more about them and some fun anecdotes with Jerry Greenberg. When it comes to Atlantic Records' story during this momentous time in music, there is one man who was there for it all and played a role in some of the biggest rock hits of all time. Jerry Greenberg, youngest person to ever become president of a major record label, helped sign on bands such as the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin using his charm and drumming experience. And today I was able to sit down with him and have a conversation about his work and legacy. Okay, that part was a little scripted. I couldn't fully get away from it. But when I say youngest person, I really mean it. He was in his early 30s, and there is an awesome podcast episode done all about his entire biography and life by Bob Lefsetz. The episode with Bob Lefsetz was posted in 2018, but it really does still hold up, and it's still a really fascinating listen, and I highly recommend it. In fact, I'm probably going to tag it below. It's where I got a lot of my information for this episode and for this interview. Without further ado, let's hear what Jerry Greenberg himself has to say, though, and I will also be interspersing with a little bit of commentary and information.
Well, I haven't been listening to that much music right now, thanks to AC/DC, because they blew my ears out, if you know what I'm saying. But I think the rap pop thing is really starting to happen. I'm also thinking the groups from the Korean market, like Blackpink and some of those artists over there, BTS, is really going to explode big time in America. So listen, music's the international language. We all dance to it, we cry to it, we sing to it. So I'm excited about, in general, what's happening in music, especially for the younger generation.
And he is 100% right. Anyone who spent any amount of time on the internet knows that you do not mess with K-pop stans. But he also had some more things to say about the future of music, and more specifically, the people who are a part of the future of music.
Well, listen, I go back with some of the greatest rock bands in the world, and I've been listening to TikTok and a little bit of the different shows that are on the air with rock bands, and I just think that the younger generation learned a lot from groups like Led Zeppelin and Grateful Dead and Aerosmith, and I think that the younger generation musically gets it where it's got to go, where it has to be really good. Songs have to be good, the productions have to be good, and it's amazing how a lot of this content is coming out of their bedrooms. I think that's very interesting, and I think I urge everybody to continue believing in music and what they're doing.
I mean, the most obvious example I personally can think of are bands such as Greta Van Fleet. However, There are so many people who I follow on TikTok personally who just started off with their laptop and are now making awesome music that I love and adore. But enough about that. If you didn't know, it's important to know that Jerry Greenberg is a drummer. And that was one of the ways he was able to connect with the artists he worked with, in that he was a musician and they were a musician. So let's hear what he has to say a little bit about the percussive side of the rock revolution.
Well, I think John Bonham was probably the greatest rock drummer in the world. Uh, no disrespect to Keith Moon and all the other guys that are out there, but nobody tuned their drums. Nobody played with the intensity and just power that John had. And being a drummer, started my band when I was 15 years old, and I always looked when I was going to sign a new band. It's interesting. I always looked to the drummer and the bass player first to get the feel, the tempo. But being around a group like Led Zeppelin was the experience of a lifetime because it was a marriage of a drummer, but then a bass player with John Paul Jones, who comes from a classical background, with Jimmy Page, who is one of the greatest rock guitar players of all time. And then all of a sudden you get Robert Plant to come along with a vocal that is so powerful that there you are, Led Zeppelin. Oh my God. But I was a promotion man back in those days, and I recognized the song Whole Lotta Love as a potential song that could get onto AM radio as opposed to FM radio and really break the band. And I remember calling Jimmy and saying, listen, if you give me an edit on Whole Lotta Love, I think I can get you played on AM stations, major AM stations. We're not a singles band, clink, and he hangs up on me. But I'm a tenacious little guy, and I kept on calling. I was good friends with the manager, and I kept on calling and calling. Finally, Peter Grant called me back and said, Jimmy said you can do an edit, but he wants to hear it. So basically what I did was I put a Whole Lotta Love on the turntable next to me, and at the part where they're singing the chorus, need a whole lot of love, doom, doom, need a whole lot of love, doom, doom, I just faded it out. So I put it on a disc, I sent it to Jimmy. Jimmy calls me up and he says, what are you going to do with this? I said, I'm just going to send it to a couple of AM stations that would play a short version of Whole Lotta Love. Okay, go ahead. Well, Jerry being the promotion man that he was and is, I pressed up 5,000 records and put Whole Lotta Love on one side, full version, Whole Lotta Love, short version, and I sent it out to all the radio stations in America. Well, we know what happened. A top 10 record, gold album, just exploded. And he thanked me very much. So did Peter Grant, thanked me very much. And the group thanked me very much. But getting back to some Led Zeppelin stories, let me just say that they knew I was a drummer. And at Madison Square Garden, I was backstage. And they would always, on their encore, Richard Cole, the road manager, would come out and play congas. And they had congas set up. So I say to Richard Cole, let me go up and play the congas. And he goes, give me $50, you got it. So I whip $50 out of my pocket. I give it to Richard Cole. He said, go ahead. I go out there, and now I am playing congas on a Whole Lotta Love on stage with Led Zeppelin. Well, Jimmy turns around and starts laughing, and Robert, And when the song gets finished, Bonzo grabs me by my collar, takes me to front of stage. I am in the middle of Led Zeppelin taking a bow at Madison Square Garden. That's a memory that I'll never forget, ever, ever. Unfortunately, we can't get a picture of it. Nobody had pictures in those days. They wouldn't let anybody in with cameras. But the bottom line is the story's in my documentary, story is in my book, and it's a great story, inspirational story for anybody. So that's a little bit of Led Zeppelin.
And I hope that everyone listening will eventually check out his book and documentary when those both come out. Now, the next thing I wanted to know about Jerry had to do with his ear, because for those of you who don't know, Jerry had this unique and amazing ability to hear an album and pick out a single. And I wanted to know, is this an innate skill? Is it something he learned? Is it something that can be taught? What secret is there to give, if there's any? Let's hear his take on that.
Well, the deal during those years, I was head of promotion, and I really knew what radio was looking for. I grew up listening to a lot of groups and a lot of music, and I think I had the feel for a top 40 record. So the phone rings, it's Ahmet again, chairman of Atlantic Records, and he said, Mick Jagger's here with the new Rolling Stones record. Meet me in the control room. He's going to play the album. He wants you to listen and pick what you think is the first single. So I said, okay, great. So there we are in the control room listening to the album, and Brown Sugar comes on. And when I would hear a hit, I get like goosebumps, and I just get the feel. And I turn to Mick and I go, Mick, that's your first single, I promise you. Brown Sugar's a hit. And Ahmed, his exact words were, you should listen to Jerry. He picks all the hits for Atlantic Records. And that's the Brown Sugar Rolling Stones story. And we became friends ever since. And every time he put out a record, he'd come to me, listen to the album, see what you think. And I think I was a big help in assisting them in their careers.
But backtracking a little bit, I asked him what was the popular music of the time when he was working at Atlantic Records.
Listen, you go over the hits of 1971, and you'll know that, back then it was, very little rock, but some rock that would cross over, Aerosmith maybe, or Motley Crue. But it was pop radio in that time was, the Osmond Brothers and Leif Garrett and, it's the younger acts, good singers like Aretha Franklin or the Spinners that would cross over into pop radio. But it was really a mix of everything, depending on the area. Detroit had certain things that they would play. Chicago, Miami, for instance, was a big dance music town. So Miami radio was always, dance music, Chic or the Tramps, etc., etc. So it depended on the region. It depended on California, the Beach Boys, etc., etc. So radio at that time was very instrumental in creating great bands, great music, and great artists.
We then spoke a little bit about his process as to signing bands to Atlantic Records, and he provided a pretty amazing example. Take a listen.
Well, it's interesting because I knew a manager, his name was Bud Prager, and he called me up and he said, listen, I found this great band. I need you to come and see them. So they arranged an audition. I remember I came with two of my A&R guys, And what I always try to do every time I'm going to meet a band for the first time, like I did it with Genesis and I did it with Roxy Music and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, was to let them know I'm one of you. I'm a drummer. I'm a musician. I'm not a corporate executive shirt and tie guy. So they would feel much more comfortable about talking to me and playing. So they get up. They did like 2 or 3 songs. And the one thing, again, I try to do is get over the fact that I'm a pretty good drummer. So I say to Mick Jones, listen, let me play on that song again and show you that I'm a pretty good drummer. So I get up and I play whatever song they were presenting. I'm a very good 2 and 4 drummer for those that understand what I'm saying. And they looked at me and Mick Jones said to me, you know what? You're great. Thank you. We really appreciate that. So I said, well, I'll tell you what. I'll put in the contract that I give you a gold album, your first record out. You let me play with you at Madison Square Garden. Because I remember doing the Led Zeppelin show. And they go, done. Well, we all know what happened with Foreigner. 1,000,000 records right out of the box. So they're going to play the Garden. I show up. And all of a sudden they announce, and the president of Atlantic Records is here, and he's a drummer, and he's going to sit in with the band. And sure enough, they take out a second drum set. I sit down next to the drummer, and I'm wailing. I mean, here I am, man. I'm Madison Square Garden playing Feels Like the First Time. So song ends, we get up, and after backstage, the drummer, Dennis Elliott, says to me, man, you were really good. And Mick says, and Lou Graham said, we're going to take a second drum set on the road with us, and anytime you show up, you could play with us. So, of course, I look at that tour, and I don't want to go to Chicago or Detroit. It's cold, it's snowy, but I sure like to go to Miami, and I sure like to go to California. So I showed up, I played the Forum, I played in Miami with the band, but we were very close. They became like family to me and to my family, and we're still close to this day. And I think it's important building a relationship that's more musical and not business-like, if you know what I'm saying, friendly-like. And that's what I think I built with all of my bands. So it's a good question.
So I guess technically he's played Madison Square Garden twice, which is an insane thing to say.
Well, I'm so impressed right now watching what's going on with younger musicians, younger singer-songwriters. It's amazing what's going on out there. And what I think is the fact that you grew up with your parents playing all of this music. I mean, I was in the airport the other day and a young 18-year-old wearing a Led Zeppelin t-shirt. And I went over to him and I said, you're a fan of Led Zeppelin? I said, you're 18 years old. What do you know about? Oh, I used to hear their music growing up and this and that. I really urge serious singer-songwriters, serious musicians, serious people that want to get into the music business and that idolize different artists out there. I mean, to follow their instinct, follow their career, don't get disheartened. And record companies are different today than the situation, but you got Facebook, you got all of these different situations, TikTok, that are discovering artists and wanting to do things with artists. Artists today can have their own account and sell records and sell their music to people that are fans by themselves. It's not necessarily need a big record company anymore. So I urge everybody. I was 15 years old. I had my own record company. I was recording for Atlantic Records, making records for different record companies. I was 15 years old. So that should be a message to everybody out there. You can do it. You really can do it. So I urge you, and carry on and have faith and follow your instinct. Really follow your instinct.
There you go, folks. Follow your instinct. One of the most amazing things about doing this show and doing this podcast is how much I, as a young musician, have gotten to learn from speaking to people such as Jerry Greenberg and all the guests of season 1 and the guests that are going to be coming in season 2. It has been as much of a learning experience for me as I hope it's been for all of you. But Jerry has a few things to shout out before we end this episode.
Well, all I can say to you is there's a lot of documentaries coming out. My good friend Neil Bogart that ran Buddha and had Casablanca has a movie out now. Just things out by different artists, documentaries that you should watch and get an idea about your career and what you can do and how these other beginning artists formed and became established. So all I can do is urge you to watch a lot of television now and the different documentaries that are on YouTube, especially YouTube, and stay with it. If you think you can write, think you can play, you think you can promote, you can be an actress or anything in that genre, do it. Please do it. I urge you. I'm doing a book on the years at Atlantic Records that I think it would be very informative, all about the history of Atlantic. And we've been shooting a documentary now for over 7 years that a major TV movie producer loves, is very interested in. We're almost finished. So I would say by next year, 2024, there'll be a lot of information about Jerry Greenberg that you're hearing right now in its early stages. So stay tuned.
And there we have it. There you go. That was my interview with Jerry Greenberg. I was so nervous going into this interview. I wanted to get it right. He is such a big name in the music industry, and I just needed to make sure that I didn't make a fool of myself in front of him, and I don't think I did. So I'm pretty happy with that. Like I said, the next episode will be coming out next week, and he is a super awesome guest as well. We actually met over TikTok, but you guys will hear more about that next week. And then after that, we will be going back to our regular schedule of new episodes being every other Friday. I am so excited to share season 2 with you. I hope you all like the small changes that we are making to the podcast and hopefully the little improvements that are coming along the way. Thank you for listening. Please make sure to subscribe, leave a review, follow me on all social media platforms, and have an amazing day.